I don't know if he's just being disrespectful.
Didn't complain about my performance or conduct. You did.
Courtrooms are usually places of order and seriousness, but every now and then, things take a strange turn. From bizarre outbursts to jaw-dropping antics, some cases leave everyone in the room wondering what just happened. Here are some of the weirdest courtroom moments that defied all expectations. In a Miami-Dade County bond hearing, the last thing anyone expected was for a routine court proceeding to turn into a spectacle. But 24-year-old Nicole Bab made sure no one forgot that day when she decided to strip naked in the middle of the courtroom. Yes, you heard that right. Right in front of Judge Gerald Klein, in a room full of people, she disrobed while waiting for her bond hearing on charges of identity theft. Picture the scene. It's a regular day in court with people going about their business and handling their cases. Judge Klein is calmly presiding over a series of bond hearings. Nicole Bab, facing charges of identity theft, is sitting quietly among the defendants. Then, out of nowhere, she stands up and begins removing her clothes right there in front of everyone. The courtroom, which usually maintains a strict air of seriousness and professionalism, suddenly felt more like a bizarre stage show. At first, people were stunned. Some might have thought it was a joke. Others were just plain confused. But soon enough, a wave of laughter spread through the room. It was impossible to ignore the sheer oddity of the situation. Imagine sitting there, expecting the usual dry legal process, and suddenly this happens. The laughter, though, quickly faded into disbelief as everyone realized Nicole was serious about her unorthodox courtroom performance. Judge Gerald Klein, though, was not fazed at all. While the people in the room reacted in shock or amusement, the judge remained calm and composed, as if he'd seen it all before. No theatrics from his end. He swiftly regained control of the courtroom, directing officers to remove Nicole from the scene to restore some semblance of order. Despite the disruption, Judge Klein didn't let the moment rattle him. With the same calm demeanor he had maintained throughout the incident, he set Nicole's bond at $5,000 for her identity theft charges. It was a masterclass in courtroom control. While others were thrown off by the bizarre turn of events, Judge Klein remained focused, handling the situation like a true professional. Once Nicole was escorted out and the room settled, the courtroom returned to its usual proceedings. But the memory of that day stuck with everyone present. It's not every day you see someone strip naked in court, after all. Nicole Bab's unexpected and frankly baffling behavior made headlines, but Judge Klein's composure under pressure was equally memorable. The trial of Daryl Brooks was one of the most chaotic and strange courtroom spectacles in recent memory. Brooks was facing some of the most serious charges imaginable. He was accused of driving his mother's SUV into a crowd at the Waukesha Christmas parade, killing 6 people and injuring over 60 more. The victims ranged from young children to elderly parade goers, making this case a tragic and devastating event for the entire community.
Observed that for about the past 40 minutes, Mr. Brooks appears to be asleep in the courtroom. I don't know if he's just being disrespectful, uninterested, or if he's not feeling well.
At one of Brooks' pre-trial hearings, things started to go off the rails when he fell asleep in the courtroom. The prosecutor even pointed it out, wondering aloud whether Brooks was being blatantly disrespectful or simply didn't care about the severity of the charges he was facing. This wasn't the last time his strange behavior would disrupt the proceedings either.
People like you don't know nothing about where I come from.
Mr. Brooks.
You push me, dog. Don't push back then.
Mr. Brooks.
Don't push back. Push me again.
Mr. Brooks, we have to continue with this hearing.
When the trial finally started, Brooks made the highly unusual decision to represent himself, despite the fact that he had no legal training. This move alone introduced a level of unpredictability, but Brooks took it much further with his erratic and bizarre conduct. He frequently interrupted the judge, lashed out at the courtroom staff, and at one point became so uncooperative that the judge moved him to a separate courtroom where he could participate in the trial remotely via video. But even in his isolated courtroom, Brooks didn't calm down. He took off his clothes, exposing himself on camera, and later constructed a makeshift fort out of cardboard boxes around himself, presumably to block the view of the camera. His behavior was so outlandish that it seemed like he was treating the trial as a joke, despite the fact that his life was on the line. Throughout the trial, Brooks continued to make outbursts and engage in bizarre antics that frustrated the judge, the prosecution, and the victims' families. But in the end, none of it worked in his favor. After a 3-week trial, the jury took just a few hours to return with a guilty verdict on all 76 charges, including 6 counts of intentional homicide. During the sentencing phase, victims' families gave emotional impact statements, with one family member even saying Brooks was a monster and deserved contempt and death. Ultimately, Brooks was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never be free again.
All right, good morning, sir. Your name, please?
James Gross.
Oh, no, you've been on bond since 28th of May. Plus, you've got some prior convictions. I'll set no bond on this. That'll keep you in custody for your next court date.
When James Gross appeared in court for a simple trespassing charge, no one expected what happened next. Instead of showing up in regular clothing, Gross decided to make his entrance in a black robe that looked eerily similar to what a judge would wear. It's not every day you see a defendant dressed like a judge, and this was just the beginning of what would turn into a strange and chaotic court appearance.
Do you want to represent yourself today on the trespass case?
Don't want to do what?
Represent yourself?
Sure.
Gross had been arrested for trespassing outside a gas station, a place where he'd already been warned not to return. With a lengthy criminal record, this wasn't his first run-in with the law, but his decision to show up in court dressed like he was ready to take the bench certainly raised some eyebrows. From the moment he stepped up to speak, it was clear Gross had no intention of following courtroom protocol. He interrupted the judge constantly, making it nearly impossible to get through the hearing. His statements were rambling and nonsensical, filled with unrelated comments that had nothing to do with the case at hand. It quickly became clear that Gross wasn't interested in addressing the charges against him. Instead, he seemed to be more focused on delivering his own off-topic monologue, talking over the judge repeatedly. This created a bizarre atmosphere in the courtroom, as the actual judge tried to regain control. Gross, however, was too wrapped up in his outbursts to pay any attention. It got to the point where the judge could no longer proceed with the hearing, and Gross was swiftly taken back into custody. His strange behavior, coupled with his choice of attire, left everyone in the courtroom baffled. The case didn't move forward that day, as Gross's conduct made it impossible for the proceedings to continue. Although he was taken back into custody, his trial is still pending, and it's safe to say everyone involved will be watching closely to see what happens next. Whether or not Gross will return to court in his makeshift judicial attire remains to be seen, but his first appearance has already cemented itself as one of the weirdest courtroom moments.
Yes, sir. I think it's very unfair, the marijuana law here. I think we the people deserve better because marijuana is a very harmless drug and it's been around for ages, since the 80s and 90s.
Courtrooms usually demand respect and seriousness, but Spencer Allen Boston had a very different approach during his appearance for a marijuana possession charge. Frustrated with Tennessee's strict marijuana laws, Boston decided to use his moment in front of the judge to make a bold and incredibly risky statement. Instead of quietly waiting for the judge's ruling, Boston pulled out a joint, lit it right there in the courtroom, and declared, "We the people deserve better." It was a protest that shocked everyone present. Most people, when faced with drug charges, try their best to show good behavior and avoid further trouble, but Boston chose to do the exact opposite. His frustration with the laws seemed to overpower any concern for how his actions might affect his case. Lighting up a joint during a court hearing is the kind of move that guarantees attention, but it's also the kind of decision that ensures the situation will get worse. Boston's protest was short-lived. Court officers acted immediately, rushing to detain him as the smoke from the joint still lingered in the air. The judge, who had likely seen a lot in his career, probably hadn't encountered a defendant quite like Boston before. By openly committing the very crime he was on trial for, right in front of the judge, Boston had managed to turn his hearing into one of the most bizarre courtroom moments in recent memory. Unsurprisingly, Boston's decision earned him additional charges. Besides the original marijuana possession charge, he was slapped with a disorderly conduct charge and contempt of court. The judge, clearly unimpressed by the stunt, sentenced him to 10 days in jail. It's safe to say that Boston's bold protest didn't change Tennessee's marijuana laws, but it certainly made his own situation far worse. What makes this moment so strange is that Boston willingly escalated his own legal trouble in a setting where most people would be doing everything they could to avoid more charges. By lighting a joint in front of the judge, he turned what could have been a routine court appearance into an unforgettable scene. His declaration, "We the people deserve better," showed just how deeply he felt about the issue, but it also demonstrated a complete disregard for the consequences. When attorney Dennis Hoover appeared in court for his disciplinary hearing, no one could have anticipated what was about to unfold. He was facing serious allegations of incompetence in his handling of a capital murder case, and with his law license on the line, you'd expect a defense packed with professionalism and legal precision. Instead, Hoover took a completely different route. He walked into the courtroom dressed as none other than Thomas Jefferson.
I appeared before you today dressed as Thomas Jefferson is my hero among the founders.
Wearing an 18th century suit, powdered wig, and stockings, Hoover presented himself in full founding father attire. It wasn't just a costume, it was part of his defense strategy. He explained to the Kansas Supreme Court that he wore the outfit to honor Jefferson, whom he admired for his role in drafting the U.S. Constitution. Hoover claimed that the Constitution gave him the right to try the case the way he and his client had agreed, defending his actions in the murder trial under the banner of personal liberty.
Don't forget, Philip Cheatham didn't complain about my performance or conduct. You did.
The case that brought Hoover into this bizarre situation involved Philip Cheatham, a man convicted of capital murder for killing 2 women and attempting to murder a third during a home invasion. Cheatham had a long history of violent crime, including a prior manslaughter conviction. Most defense attorneys would avoid bringing up their client's criminal past during a murder trial, but Hoover decided to use it as part of his defense strategy, openly stating that his client was a criminal for a living. That's just one example of what led the disciplinary panel to call Hoover's defense inexplicable incompetence. Despite his elaborate Jeffersonian outfit and impassioned defense, things didn't go in Hoover's favor. The Kansas Supreme Court wasn't swayed by the powdered wig or the historical references. They upheld the state's decision to disbar him, citing his failure to provide competent representation in Cheatham's trial. As a result of Hoover's defense strategy, Cheatham was granted a new trial, where he eventually pleaded no contest in exchange for the defense penalty being dropped. What made this courtroom moment so strange wasn't just Hoover's choice to model his defense on one of America's founding fathers. It was the surreal image of a man fully dressed as Thomas Jefferson defending his professional competence in the highest court of Kansas. In a setting where appearances are typically understated and serious, Hoover's dramatic flair made for an unforgettable moment of courtroom absurdity.
Hello there, Your Honor, I want to say I'm sorry.
In Washtenaw County, Michigan, one courtroom moment left people both scratching their heads and chuckling at the same time. Brian Earl Taylor, a 21-year-old man facing charges of carrying a concealed weapon and unlawful imprisonment, decided to take a rather unconventional approach during his sentencing. Instead of giving a standard statement of apology or remorse, Taylor broke into a heartfelt rendition of Adele's hit song Hello, rewriting the lyrics to express his regret and plead for forgiveness. It's not every day that you see someone standing before a judge and belting out a song in hopes of softening the blow of their sentencing, but that's exactly what happened. The courtroom was already tense, as Taylor was about to be sentenced for some serious crimes, including holding a gun to a man's stomach during an attempted robbery. But as he stood before the judge, Taylor did something no one saw coming. He began to sing, "Hello there, Your Honor, I want to say I'm sorry for the things I've done," using the tune of Adele's song to convey his remorse. His voice filled the room, and while his performance was sincere, the uniqueness of the situation left people in the courtroom torn between surprise and amusement. You could hear a few chuckles as the shock wore off. No one knew how to react. After all, it's not every day you hear a convicted felon sing Adele in court. But despite the creativity and emotion behind Taylor's song, the judge wasn't swayed by his musical apology. His crimes were still serious, and no amount of singing was gonna change that. When it came time for sentencing, the judge handed him 2 years in prison for carrying a concealed weapon and 18 months for unlawful imprisonment to be served consecutively. It was a tough reality for Taylor, whose serenade didn't change the course of justice, but it certainly made for an unforgettable courtroom moment. The judge, though likely caught off guard by the performance, kept a straight face, understanding that this was a momentary expression of regret rather than a real legal defense.
No, you stand at this podium, right?
Awesome.
I
Can you
get-
tell me
Hey, man, you have to come up here. We can't record
what
you
laws
back
you
there.
guys operate under?
The laws of the state of Kentucky.
Kha Johnson's courtroom appearance for a simple marijuana possession charge quickly turned into a chaotic standoff. Johnson wasn't just another defendant. She identified as part of the Sovereign Citizens Movement, a group that believes they aren't subject to the laws of the government or the courts. As a result, Johnson repeatedly interrupted the judge during her arraignment, refusing to cooperate and insisting that the court had no jurisdiction over her. Things started to go off the rails when the judge asked her to approach the podium and face the charges. Instead of complying, Johnson remained at the back of the courtroom and demanded proof that the court had any authority over her. She argued that she came under common law and that the court had to prove its jurisdiction before it could proceed. Each time the judge attempted to move forward with the case, Johnson interrupted, causing the situation to become more and more tense. The scene escalated even further when one of Johnson's friends, seated in the gallery, began filming the proceedings on her phone. In Kentucky, judges have discretion over whether recording is allowed in the courtroom, and this judge had not permitted it. The friend refused to stop filming, leading to her own arrest after she caused a scene and defied the court's orders. The courtroom quickly devolved into chaos, with Johnson continuing her defiance while her friend was taken into custody. Eventually, Johnson's refusal to cooperate led the judge to arrest her for contempt of court. The whole situation had spiraled out of control, with Johnson and her friend both facing new charges on top of the original marijuana possession case. The next day, though, Johnson appeared before a new judge with a completely different attitude. She apologized for her behavior, acknowledging that she had been disrespectful and that she needed to act in a more appropriate manner while in court. In the end, Johnson's case resulted in 2 charges being dropped, but she was still found guilty of marijuana possession and fined $185. Her friend, who'd been arrested for filming the proceedings, also faced consequences and spent a day in jail for disorderly conduct. Let us know your thoughts on these cases, and don't forget to like and subscribe.